For more than a century, the United States and Canada have managed their vast shared freshwater systems through legal frameworks such as the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and the Columbia River Treaty. Accords that were created precisely because rivers and lakes crossing an international border are too economically and ecologically important to be governed unilaterally. And in recent years, those arrangements have taken on renewed significance as the Western United States confronts prolonged drought, shrinking snowpacks, stressed reservoirs, and rising competition among agriculture, cities, industry, and power generation. While Canada homed to roughly one-fifth of the world's surface, freshwater faces its own pressures from climate variability, indigenous water rights claims, ecosystem protection, and infrastructure demands. Debates in Washington, Ottawa, and state and provincial capitals increasingly revolve around how to modernize aging water-sharing agreements, how to finance flood control and hydropower upgrades, how to protect drinking water sources for tens of millions of people around the Great Lakes Basin, and how to adapt river management rules written in the mid-20th century to 21st century extremes of drought and flooding. Even as officials on both sides repeatedly emphasize that existing treaties remain legally binding and that cooperative management and that confrontation has historically delivered stability, predictable energy production, safer downstream communities, and environmental recovery in waterways that once suffered from severe industrial pollution. In the Pacific Northwest, for example, U.S. utilities, flood control agencies, tribes, fishing communities, and shipping interests all depend on coordinated releases from reservoirs in British Columbia and Montana to reduce spring flood risk while supporting hydropower and salmon habitat, and any change to those arrangements involves years of technical studies, diplomatic negotiation, and public consultation rather than sudden policy shifts. While in the Great Lakes region, governors, premiers, mayors, and business leaders routinely point out that the lakes underpin hundreds of billions of dollars in shipping, manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism, supply drinking water to more than 40 million people, and are protected by domestic laws and by national agreements that restrict large-scale diversions and require joint scientific oversight. Economists warn that as water scarcity becomes more visible in parts of the United States, especially across California's Central Valley, the Colorado River Basin, and fast-growing Sunbelt cities, investors are paying closer attention to hydrological risk, insurance costs, and infrastructure resilience, factors that influence farmland values, factory siting decisions, data center construction, and long-term municipal bond ratings while federal and state agencies expand funding for desalination research, water recycling, reservoir modernization, leak reduction, aquifer recharge, and drought-resistant crops, precisely because relying on external sources is neither politically straightforward nor legally simple under existing treaties. Security analysts add that water is increasingly discussed alongside energy, food, and rare earth minerals as a strategic resource in a warming world. Not because war over rivers is inevitable, but because governments everywhere, from Europe to Asia to the Middle East, are reassessing supply chains, agricultural security, and infrastructure vulnerability in the face of climate change, population growth, and extreme weather. Developments that naturally draw attention to countries like Canada, with large freshwater endowments, even as Canadian officials stress that water governance is rooted in domestic law, indigenous rights, provincial authority, and long-standing international obligations rather than export policy. Historians note that cooperative river management has often served as a stabilizing force in North American relations, with joint commissions, shared data networks, and dispute resolution mechanisms designed to prevent unilateral action and political escalation, and that past successes from cleaning up heavily polluted stretches of the Great Lakes too. Coordinating flood control on transboundary rivers illustrate why technocratic negotiation and scientific monitoring have usually prevailed over rhetoric when tensions arise. Yet they also acknowledge that climate-driven stress is testing systems built for a different era, forcing policymakers to confront difficult questions about allocation priorities, ecosystem preservation, infrastructure investment, and how to balance sovereignty with interdependence in basins that physically ignore national borders. For American households, the stakes are not abstract, because water availability influences grocery prices, electricity bills, housing growth, industrial employment, and disaster risk, linking distant reservoir levels or treaty talks to everyday economic life in ways that are becoming more visible with each dry year and wildfire season. While Canadian communities weigh similar trade-offs between hydropower revenue, environmental stewardship, regional development, and the rights of Indigenous nations, whose territories compass many of the rivers and lakes at the center of cross-border agreements. Taken together, these realities explain why discussions about shared waters increasingly occupy space in diplomatic briefings, legislative hearings, academic conferences, and business planning documents on both sides of the border, not as evidence of an imminent rupture, but as part of a broader reckoning with how climate change, aging infrastructure, and shifting economic patterns are reshaping resource politics in North America, reinforcing a central and still unsettled question for the decades ahead: how the United States and Canada can modernize the cooperative systems that have governed their waterways for generations, while protecting national interests, supporting economic growth, honoring environmental and Indigenous commitments, and ensuring that freshwater, one of the continent's most vital assets, remains a source of stability rather than strain in an increasingly water-stressed world.